Okay.
Okay.
Let's
Gwen, I know you
see.
had asked there's a link on the shul webpage to the
Yes.
YouTube channel that has all
Ye-
the shiurim.
Yeah, but I didn't find last week's.
You didn't find last week's. Last week's is definitely there.
Really?
I mean, it should be there. I can help. I can send you a direct link to after this.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay. All right. We are in Parshat Vayakhel, and we're going to be a little Hasidic tonight.
Good.
Good, good. All right, let me zoom in. Is that good?
No.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Um, so Vayakhel is we're in the home stretch of Sefer Shmot. Usually Vayakhel is read together with Pekude. This year it's not because it's a double part. It's a leap year, sorry. So it's not a double parsha. They each get their own week. And also this week is Parshat Shkalim, which means we're going to take two Torahs out and we're going to read the special maftir. It's actually from last week's parsha, from Parsha Kitisa, about the half shekel. So and it begins a period known as the Daled Parshiot. The four parshas. There's four special maftirs leading around this time, leading to Purim and then to Pesach. So we'll have lots of Torahs coming out of the Ark in the coming weeks, and lots of topical interesting stuff to talk about. So anyway, Parshat Vayakhel has, if Jeff Coleman, it's a good thing I changed the name on this account, because if he found out that I was sharing with you the verses I'm about to share, I'm not sure how happy he'd be as the shul president. So we have Vayakhel is largely repetitive, and it goes through kind of the first go round in the past couple weeks. I've been setting out the vision for what the Mishkan is to be. And Vayakhel describes the actual implementation of that plan. And then Parshat Pekude in broad strokes sort of is like the accounting, is the making sure that the books are balanced at the end of the project, going through all the different materials and all of that. So that's one way to think about it. So in that context, we have this chapter 36 opens with the following. So we know last week that Bitzalel was singled out as the chief artisan, the chief person in charge of implementing the project, along with Aholiav. So we read in chapter 36, V'asa Bitzalel v'Aholiav v'chol ish chacham liv asher natan Hashem chachma u'tvuna bahema ladat לעשות את כל מלאכת עבודת הקודש לכל אשר ציווה Hashem, Bitzalel and Aholiav and every person of wise heart to whom God gave wisdom and understanding to know how to make the crafts. They did everything God commanded. ויקרא משה בצלאל ואל אהליאב וכל איש חכם לב אשר נתן השם חכמה בליבו כל אשר נשא ליבו לקרבה אל מלאכת לעשות אותה. Moshe calls all of these people that were involved in the construction. ויקחו מלפני משה את כל התרומה אשר הביאו בני ישראל למלאכה, למלאכת עבודת הקודש לעשות אותה, והם הביאו אליו עוד נדבה בבוקר. They brought before Moshe all of the donations that the people had given for this holy project. They brought it to more gifts to Moshe each morning. ויבואו כל החכמים העושים את כל מלאכת הקודש, איש ממלאכתו אשר הם העושים. All of the wise people came from whatever their particular skill or project was. ויאמרו el Moshe לאמור. This is the part that Jeff would be very uncomfortable with. Marbim ha'am lehavi midei ha'avoda lamlacha asher tzivah Hashem לעשות אותה. The people are bringing too much for that which God commanded. Vayitzav Moshe, vaya'aviru kol b'machane lemor. Ish ve'isha al ya'asu od melacha lichumat hakodesh vayikaleha ha'am mehavi. So Moshe commanded, and they broadcast throughout the camp, saying, no one, man or woman, should bring any more donation, any more materials for donation for this holy project. And the nation stopped bringing. Okay, probably the first time ever, first and only time in the course of Jewish history that that the leader called off the charity drive when it was still going strong. V'hamlacha hayitha dayam l'chol hamelacha la'asot ota v'hoter. This is a verse that's very difficult to translate. This is what we're going to focus our attention on. The literal translation, hamelacha, the work, was sufficient for all the work that had to be done, v'hoter, and it was excessive, or it was extra. It's a very difficult word. I mean, the way that this English translation has it is, their efforts had been more than enough for all the tasks to be done. Completely ignores the final word in the pasuk in Hebrew, v'hoter. And so we're going to try to unpack what the message might be in this enigmatic last verse. Does anyone have any initial thoughts on what's going on here?
Isn't there a modern Hebrew expression, deva hoter or daiva hoter, that about something having been accomplished, and literally it's a way of saying it's very, very good, it's enough, and even more than enough.
It could be. I've never heard that, but that doesn't mean anything. I've never heard it, but it's very possible.
The Rebbe's translation is, there was no need to have a surplus.
There was no need to have a surplus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not sure how he gets there from these words.
Well, excuse me, it's interpolated. So,
Yeah.
and to have a surplus, it sufficed, all the work had to be done, and to have a surplus, which doesn't make sense.
Right.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first commentator that really picks up on this is the Or HaChaim. So let me just make sure it's displayed for you. Dayam v'hoter. So it was sufficient and it was excessive. Hem shtei dvarim hafchiim. Im dayam eno hoter, v'im hoter eno dayam. These two phrases are contradictory. If it was sufficient, then it's not excessive, and if it's excessive, it's not sufficient. So what's going on here? So if you skip down to where the it says number 2, or the bet in the Hebrew, Ulai sheyashmi'enu hakatuv chibat b'nei Yisrael b'nei hamakom. So he says that perhaps what's going on here is the Torah is showing us how precious or how beloved the Jewish people are by God. Ki letzad shehiviu Yisrael yoter me'shiur hatzarich chash Hashem lechavod kol ish shetarchu ve'viu nichnas kol hamuva beit Hashem b'mlechet hamishkan. Says that Bnei Yisrael really did bring more than what was required, but Hashem was so sensitive to not offend anyone by saying, we already have all the gold we need, we already have all the precious stones, we have the wood, right? Bring it back to your house. So God found a way to include everything that was brought, even though it was more than necessary. Asher tziva Hashem lasot b'mishkan, he speaka lehachnis betocha kol hamalacha she'asu b'nei Yisrael. So he says the way we should read the verse is that everything that was required to build the Mishkan was supplied, or was satisfied, and sufficient, was sufficient enough, was large enough to include all of the donations that Bnei Israel did, all of the work, all the donations, all the craftsmanship. Hagam shehoter, even though in reality, it objectively was excessive, Pirush haya yoter mehatzarich, it was really more than was technically needed to build the vessels that had been described previously. Hispika mikabel lekabel yoter mishiuro al yedenis. The recipient, God, somehow managed to accept all of it in a miraculous way. So that was all included, even though it was really excessive. O al zehaderech v'amlacha sheviu hayta dayam lo chaser v'lo yoter hagam shayta yoter kefi ha'emet v'omro v'hutat v'hoter ki na'aseh nes v'lo hotir. Right? So even though, again, objectively speaking, it was more than was technically required, through some miracle, it all was used and all had a place and was able to be in service in the Mishkan. Okay, so I get the image of like a kindergarten teacher who tells the kids that they're going to make some, I don't know, whatever project they're going to make, and the kids are so excited and they bring in, I don't know, toilet paper rolls, and they bring in hundreds and hundreds of toilet paper rolls, and somehow the teacher figures out a way to include every last kid's toilet paper roll so that no one is left out and everyone feels that they're contributing. That's the image I get here. It's a little bit more beautiful than that, I think. But that's I think the basic idea that he's saying is that somehow they brought more than they really should have brought, but that Hashem was able to find a use and incorporate all of the donations into the Mishkan.
Yeah.
All right, it's I don't think it's a pshat. I don't think it's the simplest reading of the pasuk, but it certainly helps to resolve that contradiction. Any questions or reactions to the Orach Chaim? All right, let's move on. The Kedushas Levi, Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. I remember I became quite fond of this particular comment of the Kedushat Levi when I was in rabbinical school. When I was in yeshiva, I'm sure I told you at some point, I went on a mission of rabbinical students across 4 or 5 different denominational affiliations with AJWS to El Salvador. And it was a very intense week of not only figuring out how rabbinical students from 7 different rabbinical schools, again, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, non-denominational, post-denominational, would exist Jewishly as a group, and how we would exist in El Salvador, visiting really an impoverished community. But one of the people leading the trip was Rabbi Or Rose, who is a teacher at the Hebrew College in Boston, and is an expert and a scholar on the Kedushas Levi. So I came home from that trip very inspired by the Kedushas Levi, and this was the first one that I really spent some serious time trying to work my way through. And so he comments on this same pasuk, and the same contradiction in the Orach Chaim. He quotes our verse. Hine lichora, and someone will tell me when it's time to scroll down in the English. Hai dayam v'hoter hutarte desatre hadade. Right? These two phrases, sufficient and excessive, are contradictory. Im hoter, right? Ayin b'orach chaim. So he says, see what the Orach Chaim has to say on this. The Yesh Lomar. We could add to what the Orach Chaim says. Tihine huyit barach El Shaddai. So he says that we find a similar feature in one of God's names, and that's the name El Shaddai, or Kel Shakai, as we would say in El hu milashon chozek. So the word El represents strong. Right? How does it translate here? Strength and power, as it says in Yecheskel, Elei haaretz, the mighty ones of the land. And Vishadai hu hashpa'a milashon shadayim. And the word Shaddai comes from the word Shadayim, which means breasts, which represents nurturing, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu El Shaddai. So God is, right, these also seem to be two contradictory traits. But God is El Shaddai, Shemit Gaber Kivyachol Al Hashpa'ato. What does it mean? It means that he's able to control his influence, his nurturing spirit. V'zeh shedarshu chachmenu zal she'amar le'olamo dai. Right, the rabbis say that that when God was creating the world, at some point he says, "Die, it's enough. The world as it is how it should be." What does that mean? Hine kol davar haba mikoach ein sof, az yachol hadavar hahu litrachev litpashet ad ein shior ve'erech. Anything that comes from God, from the Ein Sof, and how would you translate Ein Sof?
No end.
Without end.
Without end, or the infinite giver, perhaps the infinite power. So that thing can go on ad infinitum, okay, right, without end. Ve'im kain kevan dehuit barach bara olamot as hayurotzim litpashet b'li gevul. So when God created the world, everything wanted, all the things that God created wanted to continue without any boundary, without any border, without any limit. So God had to say, die, it's enough, right? So for example, God says, let there be trees. So whatever powers bring about the creation of trees and of fruit, right? They just want to keep on making fruit, trees and trees and trees and trees and trees. But God said, no, there's enough trees, right? The way that we're treating the world, maybe we should have let the trees keep going for a little while, little longer. But no, but God said it's enough, right? However, at some point there's a limit. Litin kach v'kach sidur olamim lefi ma she'ivini barach v'chachmato el Yonah kama tzarich lefi seder habriya. Right? God had calculations about how many trees, how many animals, how many stars, how much water. Right? God knew exactly how much of each thing there had to be. The Azamar die, and so when it reached that limit, he said, "Die, it's enough." Zehu Gvura. So that is Gvura, right? So he's also playing on the right the very ironic concept that we find in Pirkei Avot. Ezehu Gibor. What's the definition? Who is someone who's truly strong? Not the person with the biggest muscles, but
One who's in
Hakovesh et
control.
Yitro, the person who's able to control their desire, to control their inclination, right? So God's gevura, God's strength, that he was able to rein it in. He was able to stop what was this awesome creative force. I just lost my place. Gazamar dai v'zehu gevura v'tzimtzum, right? So this is the God's might and the concept of tzimtzum, of constriction, or however we're going to translate that phrase. Shutzrachi parach litzamtzem kocho. God had to constrict, had to rein in his own strength. Kimokein hu yitbarach tzarich lihit naheg ve'olamo lefi koach hamekablim v'lo kefi kocho ha'ein sof. So too, once the world is created, God has to relate to the world according to the power and the capacity of the creatures living in the world. Not according to God's strength and God's capacity, which is unlimited, but according to the limited human capacity and capacity of the animals and the trees and everything else. Are we still good here? Does that all right, I'm not doing an exact translation here anyway. Ki Yisrael einam yicholim lekabel lo rov tuva. Right? The Gemara says that Bnei Yisrael can't receive too much good. V'hinei melechet hamishkan shaya me'ein v'yat shemaim va'aretz haya mesudar v'nechona al pi seichel elokim. So when it comes to the Mishkan, as we saw a couple weeks ago, which is modeled and paralleled after creation of the world, it was originally plotted out based on God's godly knowledge and godly insight. And combining together the letters and the words with which the world was created. Right, this is part of what Bezalel's great insight was, that he knew how to manipulate the words and the letters in the same way that God did. And God implanted in their hearts the wisdom, the understanding, the knowledge. And God gives this strength, this power to the righteous people in every generation. When a tzaddik is occupied with Torah and comes up with new insights, with chidushim, they are creating heaven and earth, a new heaven and earth. When they were making the Mishkan, they were therefore tapped into this divine, elevated spirit. And they made these insights with every vessel of the Mishkan. So they were so tapped in that they could have gone nonstop and just, again, continue to create and create and create, and make incredible things. Because they really were too tapped into the Spirit of God. They had to have a limit on what they were doing. They had to, right, the way that he's reading Vehoter, it was excessive, is they had to leave some of this spirit, some of this insight over for future generations. So that they also could come up with new insights. Just like Bezalel and his team were doing with the Mishkan. And that's the meaning of when the Torah says that the work was sufficient, that they were able to set limits. Right, that they were able to tap into and connect with the divine wisdom and vision according to their intellect. Ach vehoter, but at the same time, there was this excessive. Shotiru latzadikim v'chachamim seichel shekol dor asher yishmu yomedu seder melechat hamishkan v'hem yigmeru hagbinyan v'yosifu midatam mashi yasik sichlam. They left some of this over for future generations, so that when they learn about the Mishkan, they will complete its construction and they will add on to what was already achieved. It's a beautiful, beautiful idea. It's a little esoteric. Does anyone want to summarize or say what they think is the message of the Kedushas Levi here?
Leaving over something for our descendants.
Yeah. So that right there had to be this holding back in order to allow for future generations to have their part as well. It wasn't just that we needed to incorporate all the gold that was brought during the time of Moshe and Bezalel, but that we want to allow future generations to leave their impact as well, even if our own impact might not be physical as far as gold and precious stones, but might be more as far as offering new insights, new understandings, new interpretations about what was going on here. It's a beautiful thought.
May I refer to our understanding of the oral Torah?
That,
Beautiful. Very
Hmm?
good.
you say?
Yeah.
Which is
Okay, so that's the Kedushas Levi. And by the way, the Kedushas Levi, I mean, it's a common theme throughout, but he says specifically another favorite comment of his, of mine, another of my favorite comments of the Kedushas Levi, um, is on when Hashem tells Moshe, Ko Tomar Livnei Israel. When Moshe gets the Torah, God tells him, this is what you should say to the Jewish people. So the Kedushas Levi there has a beautiful insight that Moshe had to limit himself. He says that Moshe could have understood and reached the highest of the highs and gained tremendous, really was on the same level to gain total insight into what God thought, how God operated. Hashem said, no, if you learn the Torah on Sinai at the level that you're capable of, then you won't be able to share it with the Jewish people. So you have to hold yourself back in order to make Torah something that can be shared and understood by everyone.
ties in with what we learned last week.
Yes, yes. Um, and yeah, you wonder how much sort of self-reflection there is in that piece. How much did Kedushas Levi feel that he was sort of holding himself back or was limited in what he could do in order to share and connect with his Kehillah, with his followers. Um, so anyway, so that's the Kedushas Levi. And now we'll move on to the Sfas Emes, who's troubled by the same thing. He's also going to quote the Or HaChaim, and as we'll see there, he has two passages where he says very similar ideas, and then he takes in a third passage he takes it in a very different direction. So the Sfat Emet says we'll do the first one inside in a little bit more detail, and the second one maybe just quickly work through the English, and then we'll see how much time we have left for the third one. So he begins, and this is one of his, I think it's actually his first one, right? So the Sfat Emet of many Hasidic commentators, there what we have of theirs is sort of the notes that were taken from their drashas and their whatever divrei Torah they gave over the course of a Shabbos, right after Shabbos, the Hasidim would write it down, or he would write it down. I don't know how involved he was, but there's some, it's recorded in the book chronologically by how he said it. So it goes year by year, and you can see sort of the development of his thought, although it would certainly be more helpful for those of us trying to make sense of things if it was presented sort of by idea rather than chronology. But it is interesting to see how his ideas on the same pasuk, the same basic concept, develop year to year. But the point of that is this is the very first one in his, this is the first thing that he gave to his Chasidim on Parshat Vayakhel. This is the first thing in the Sfat Emet on this parsha. So he quotes our pasuk, Marbima Am Lehavi. Vayitzav Moshe ve'kalei am me'avi. So okay, so he quotes our pasuk. They brought too much, so Moshe said, "Stop bringing." Yesh lahavin ma ze ha'arichut v'torah binyan zeh. Says, why does the Torah go to such detail about this? Nireh ki ra'u tzadikim v'chachamim ki nitpashet ha'nidvut yoter me'hara'ui. He says, often it happens that when you're involved in a project, in something, that you can get carried away with it. And so they were giving more than they should have given, right? So yeah, when you give tzedakah, you have to be financially responsible about it, right? The Gemara says you're not allowed to give to the point that then you'll become dependent on others. And there's actually limits to how much tzedakah a person can give. There's interesting discussions because it's generally, discussed in terms of like percentages, like you shouldn't give more than 10%, 20%. But what if someone is crazy rich, right? Like Warren Buffett's of the world who have pledged to give away 99% of their wealth. So on the one hand, that's a huge um, violation of what the Gemara sets up. But on the other hand, even if he gives away 99% of his wealth, he'll still have billions of dollars and he'll be fine. There's a lot of interesting discussions, but the point is that there's supposed to be limits. So the Sfat Emet isn't talking about financial limits, but he's talking about spiritual limits. So he says that once they started giving, they got caught up in the act of giving. So the people were giving so much and with such excitement that at some point they no longer had the proper intention. They were no longer giving because they were doing what God wanted them to do. They were giving because they wanted to keep up with their neighbor. They were giving because this is what everyone else was doing. It wasn't for the right purpose. Really, everything goes after how much it's done for the divine will. So, right, a very prominent concept in Chassidut, quoting from Yecheskel. I gave you the verse above that in Yecheskel's first prophecy. He has a vision of God, of what's happening up in heaven, and he says, "Achayot ratzo vashov k'marei habazak," dashing to and fro among the creatures with something that looked like flares. But the idea is that every Jew, every person, goes in a way which is ratzo vashov. Sometimes you're running forward with great excitement, and then there's retreating, right? That's sort of the description of the human condition. Perush al pi masha katuv b'shem abesht nirot shemikol avoda yikabel yira busha yikeshegomer kol masav ba'ali dei gvahut. Right, so the Baal Shem Tov explains this idea that whenever someone is involved in service and worship of God, let me go back to the Sfat Emet here. Whenever someone is involved in service or worship of God, they get a level of yira, of fear, and of busha, of humility, because when they finish whatever they're doing, it can lead to vahut, to sort of a haughtiness. But if you approach it in this manner of ratzo vashov, of going forth and coming back, so then you'll have checks on yourself, and you won't come to a place of haughtiness or doing things for the wrong purpose, but you'll be able to keep yourself in check. Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom v'chachamim shamru ma'aseh b'nei Yisrael shelo litarer bo litarev bo pniyut. So that's part of what Moshe did with the artisans, is he made sure that Bnei Yisrael had these same checks, that they didn't just give because they were carried away with the moment, but to make sure that everything that was given for the proper intention. That's his first ideal. Uvesefer Orach Chaim Midayik Lashon Dayam Behoter Disatre Hadade. Now he quotes the Orach Chaim, that these two phrases Dayam Behoter, sufficient and excessive, are contradictory. And he summarizes what the Orach Chaim says. But now he says Ulefi Darkenu, but according to our approach, Hirashnu ki al yedei zeh sheman'u atzmam achar kach meharibui, since they stopped themselves and they held themselves back from giving too much, kidichtiv vayakhel ha'am, as it says that people stopped, al yedei zeh tiknu zot hayitaron shelo nitkalkel hanidava al yedei ha'hitpashut. By stopping at some point, they were able to fix or amend their whatever excess had been given, so that it wouldn't be tainted by giving with improper motivation. Shamati me Adoni Avizal Moriva Rabizal. So I've heard from my grandfather. Perush HaPasuk Mayafu Pa'amayich Bane'alim Bat Nediv So again, he's going to give us a Hasidic read of a very beautiful pasuk from Shir Hashirim. Mayafu pamayich manalim bat nadiv. How lovely are your feet in sandals. That's not how he's going to read it. Mayafa pamayich ba'ne'alim. Na'alayim means shoes, but na'al also means to lock. A min'al is a lock on a door. So how beautiful are your are the locks, the stops. Bat nadiv. Nadiv is the same phrase, right? Means you noble ones, but nadiv lev, someone of generous heart. That's the phrase, right, that they gave to the Mishkan with nidivut, with generosity, with volunteerism. So he reads that pasuk. Where are we? Over here in the English. So he quotes his grandfather based on this pasuk from Shir Hashirim. Ki nedivat haratzon sarich min al. When you are giving generously, you need a min al. You need a lock, a key, vishmira. You need protection. Shelo yitpashet haratzon v'acheshek lidvarim acherim. That the desire with which you're doing it shouldn't spread out and become taint for improper motivations. Zehu Perush HaMishnah, Mashmi'in al hashkalim v'al kilayim. Right, so he quotes one more, and this is relevant because this Shabbos is also Shabbat Shkalim. So the Mishnah, the beginning of Shkalim, says that on Rosh Chodesh Adar, we send notice that people should donate their shekel, their half shekel. What does it mean, mashmi'im al hashkalim, that we give notice concerning the shekel? Shalit arvu ritzonot acherim leratzon hanidava. That they shouldn't mix in their foreign desires with proper desire to serve God. And the other thing the Mishnah also says that we give warning about kilayim that we wear, and also kilayim, right? This is the planting season, so that they shouldn't plant two species together. What is the meaning of, what's the significance of kilayim? Kimo vayikale ha'am mehavi. Right? Kilayim is that same verb that we saw in our psukim, vayikale ha'am mehavi, that they stopped giving. Shu bechina haminiyah sheyesh gam kein b'mitzvah hanidava, right? That kilayim is a mixing together of two different things. So we have to be very careful not to mix together proper intention with proper action with improper intention. So for the Sfat Emet, the checks that are needed are checks on making sure that whatever we're doing is, or whatever was being done for the proper intention, for the proper reason, that no one was looking to to get their name in big letters on the Mishkan, or on this menorah was dedicated by the Cohen family, and that everything should be done for the proper reason, and that no one should once they got to the point where that was losing control, so then they had to take a step back, and that's how he resolves the contradiction in this passage. I'm going to stop. Are there any questions, reactions to what we've seen so far? I know we're moving a little fast.
The analogy occurred to me of the relationship between Chesed and Gevura.
Mm-hmm.
That a person may begin to share tremendous amount of attention and so on on another person in various ways of kindness, but they may not have taken into account what that person really wants or needs from the other. And so it can be excessive. So Gevura is in the 7 emotional attributes. Chesed is placed on the right side and with the right hand, and the left hand is Gevura, which can restrict a kind of, as it mentioned in here, the word simtsum, pulling back. But the two have to learn how to work together with one another. Either of them in too much can become In the case of Gevura, it can become too compacting, restraining. It can be done in a kind of harshness or something like that. A judgment that seems to be not capable of change and all that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
So you have to have a balance between the two. It seems to me that that might be analogous to this. Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful.
It
Judy, were you
also
going to say something? Yeah.
occurred to me that we don't do that anymore. We put people's names on all over things that they donate in the synagogue.
Right. So there are plenty of anonymous donations,
Yeah.
right? But right, and there's a really rich halachic literature about that, about can we do that? Like I said,
Do.
it would be great to see Jeff on the shear, but this is you got to balance the business and certainly um there are more metaphysical ideas that doing something in someone's merits, allow it brings an elevation to the soul, and we certainly don't want to take that away from people. Um, and certainly as a way to remember loved ones who are passed, it's appropriate to donate and make sure that their names will be remembered and will be there. But and there's really interesting shuvot about that. And even even when it's clear that it's being done just to bring not you know really for the wrong reasons, um, that both the reality that the shul needs it, and better they should people should spend their money inappropriately on dedicating svarim and menorahs and whatever to the community than on a sports car or whatever else. And then there's also right sort of the next step, um, questions about what about money that was earned in inappropriate ways? Is it appropriate for Jewish institutions to accept that money? Is another really interesting question. So there's a lot of spin-offs here. But yeah, by and large, we don't hold by this anymore. And if someone wants to keep on giving, we'll gladly take it, right? That's how most of our communal organizations and institutions operate nowadays. Shell, were you about to say something?
No.
But
No.
there is another whole meaning though to
Hmm.
Ratsui and Shuv.
Yeah.
For example, it's often used to explain the behavior of Aaron's two sons who wanted to make their own sacrifice on again, a Rosh Chodesh, on the day of dedication of the Mishkan in Nisan. But so they had the ardor, they wanted to run with their sense of spiritual excitement, but these guys really didn't have any plans for coming back
Right.
and actually living in the real world. So that's the shuv. So that is also used that way in many times in Hasidic writings. I'm finding that one one yearns for something more always. There's that yearn for transcendence, but it has to be grounded. Person like going in pardes, the person who succeeds is the one who is at peace with being here and at peace with coming back to
Yeah.
here, to the
Yeah.
world where we have to do our work. So in that way, it suddenly occurred to me that the next Rashi that comes right after this says that they had to get starting on the construction. And the first thing they constructed are the tapestries. Why the tapestries? It was because the women had done the weaving on the bodies of the goats. And the goats were bleating because they couldn't move. So that's another way to look at this. In other words, there was plenty, but we have to get on with the construction already because the goats can't stand it any longer. They need to
Uh-huh.
have this taken off of them so that they can be freed and can move again. So
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't know. I thought that was a fun way of
Yeah.
looking at it.
Yeah. All right. Gwen, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is that important, but I don't know what Simson means?
Tzimtzum.
Simson.
Tzimtzum means constriction. I'm gonna do a very poor job of explaining it, but basically the idea is that because God is ever expansive and unlimited, that actually the first act of creation was God pulling himself back in. That God had to, as it were, make space for the world to exist. So there was, right, Tzimtzum is sort of a pulling back of the divine energy in order to make space for others. That's if anyone else has a better way of explaining it, please jump in. But that's sort of like very basic terms what Tzimtzum is. It's a very important concept in Kabbalistic thought, which then gets carried forth into Hasidic thought. That the first act is the act of Tzimtzum, and then along with that we have the notion. I'll stop here. I'm gonna confuse us more than is necessary. But the Tzimtzum means to constrict or to pull back, and it's in order to make space for something else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great.
And
That's fun.
in the
That's fun.
spirit of Tzimtzum, I'm gonna hold back. There's two more spot emmets here. You're welcome to look at them on your own, but it's not we're gonna rush through it. We're gonna try to get too much vehoter and not enough dayam. So I hope that this is at least sufficient to whet your appetite to see the other spot emet. And we'll pick up again next week. We are not in town this Shabbos. It's our nephew's bar mitzvah, so we're going to be in New York celebrating with him. So I'll miss seeing everyone in person, but know it's for good reasons that we're not here. And we'll see you next week over Zoom, and then back in shul the following week. So
Okay.
everyone enjoy, have a good rest of the week, and I don't know if it's too early to say have a good Shabbos, but we'll look forward to we'll be thinking of you guys when we're in New York, and we'll see everyone next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Mazel
Thank
tov.
you.
All right, thank you very much.
Scottish.
Good night.
Yes, yes. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.